Wayne County Cares really started with a single question, and it was this: what if Wayne County became a trauma-informed county? So I'm not sure what your journey has been to get to where you are, how this work started transforming, but quite frankly, that was a question that a local school superintendent asked, and the majority of us in the room had no clue what that really even meant, but we also knew that that's somewhere that we had to go. A lot of us were doing different trauma-informed trainings or practices or approaches, but we weren't really doing anything in a unified front, nor were we sharing things. So if I was doing something, Holly may not have been, and Josh and Steph may not have been. We talked about it, but we didn't really have any systematic or strategic approach. So you want to go to the next one. So these are some of the strategies that, as our work has shaped from 2021 to current, that we've used. We are totally grassroots. We really have limited framework, but one of the things that we knew from the get-go is if we didn't do something and we waited for the framework, we weren't going to have much of an impact. So we really just kind of started shooting from the hip and doing some things that we thought would make a difference. I've already said that we really didn't know what it meant to be trauma-informed, but this was the why. Josh talked about the why. We believe that trauma was the single greatest common denominator across the things that we were doing. So in the communities, I don't know if you have a birth to 5, but we know that if we get kids at a good place from birth to 5, then they're going to transition to the schools and be in a pretty good place. If they're doing well there, they're probably not going to interface with law enforcement or the criminal justice system, but we also know that kids sort of have these hiccups or these road bumps. So we really believe that if we did this well, and we had some data to show that we were making an impact, that we could also transition these kids, or we could help transition the youth to the adult sector. So college, vocation, workforce, substance abuse, domestic violence, all the things that we were looking to try to kind of interrupt. So we had 4 large community events that kind of had a different focus. We wanted to share, build, and scale some of the approaches that we'll talk about in a little bit. We already talked about the framework, or I mentioned that. And then lastly, and probably the most impactful thing that we've done, and clearly our educators always do this, but we brought in 50 local youth at an event and really listened to them. So what do they need? What can we do that has an impact on them, but also what can they do to help us? So our work with Wayne County Cares continues to evolve, but we probably don't have as much framework as it sounds like you all do in Jefferson County, which is a really cool thing to hear. So the vision was that we would be a community that recognizes the impact of trauma, meets individuals where they are, and will support all community members across the lifespan, regardless of their circumstances, in becoming engaged, resilient, connected, and thriving. And one of the single biggest things that we tried to do through our community event or events was to get the folks in our community that didn't think trauma exists to realize that it does. We know that from the ACEs study. It sounds like you guys did a community survey. It'd be really interesting to see what your data showed and what the completion rate was for those surveys. And we've got a little bit of data around an event that we did with ACEs schools. We did it with our staff in probation. What we know from social work or those in the helping profession, many of us have trauma as well. So again, how can we kind of help our community take the blinders off? And then through the mission, it was very much like you guys, educate our community on ACEs, use evidence-based practices and interventions, and then continually engage new partners in the work. One of the things that we transitioned to was trying to more directly engage the workforce side, because what we hear is there's workforce shortages and people are quitting jobs and people don't want to work, which again, we felt like some of the driver behind that could possibly be trauma.
So before we start talking about the next slide, I want you to ask yourself, what in the world does this have to do with the criminal justice system? And the answer to that is everything. So the pyramid here, I'm sure you've seen this in your work with the ACE study. But the pyramid here is foundational for our framework as a community, as a team, in figuring out ways to educate kids and keep them out of trouble and support them in being successful in their future. So your jobs are to keep students or keep children out of the juvenile justice system or hold them accountable if they break the law. All right, we are very much of the opinion that trauma is not an excuse for poor behavior, but we have to educate students on how to make different choices. So if we take things away, we have to replace them with something positive to keep them out of the juvenile justice system. So we started collaborating together when we realized that our goals aligned. So our goal was to decrease out-of-school suspensions, in-school suspensions, and discipline referrals. Their goals were to decrease juvenile detentions and to increase positivity in kids' lives. So those goals matched perfectly for us to start talking together and working together to meet each other's needs. So they help us and we help them keep students out of their system.
My turn now?
You're up.
Our second Wayne County Cares event that we had, there were about 70 or 75 people there, and we gave them some results from the original ACE survey first, because as Corey said, lots of the people in the community assumed that ACEs and trauma were things that happened to those people, right? So we had our auditorium at the high school, we had several business owners, just all kinds of prominent, if you will, people in our community there, who were very supportive and had a very positive attitude about the event, but also did not really feel like it pertained to them so much. So we gave them the results of the survey, the original ACE survey done in the 90s, and we talked to them just a little bit about the data and the follow-up tracking of those people. And then we asked them a series of questions about like what they thought these people looked like. These people look like you. Do these people have the same jobs that you have? Do they live in the same parts of town that you live in your town? Do they represent you? We gave them some of the demographics. We took out the rest of it, but we gave them each slide, we gave them a little bit more information about the demographics of the people who took the original ACE study so that they could actually see that those people were not necessarily those people. They were all of us. So we took a big risk and we gave the actual ACE screener during the presentation to the group of 69 people, hoping that we would see similar results. Pretty confident that we would. So as they took it, we had the Mentimeter or whatever that thing is show the results as they took them. And it was pretty impactful because the entire room assumed that they would all be pretty much 0 to 1. So the fact that we pushed all the way into the 8s was great. That's what we were looking for, because what we wanted from the community that day was for them to see that this was not a those people problem, that it was all of our problems.
I think the other big thing that this shows is that trauma does not have to mean that you're not going to be successful. There is hope for students and children who are impacted by trauma and adults that are impacted by trauma. Some of the things that we're going to talk about later is when we started this work, we wanted to be trauma informed. We are past the information stage, and now we have to be cognizant of the fact that we can be responsive to that trauma and do something about it as a community, as educators, as juvenile probation officers, as mental health workers, as health workers at the state level. So our panel is created of the city level, the county level, and the state level. And so all of those entities working together has really impacted our community in very, very positive ways.
So as they mentioned, I am not from Richmond, Indiana. And I have 7 years of training as a psychologist. And I came to this group from the Department of Health. And they unwillingly met with me for the first time. We were just discussing that last night. And I'm a little bit of an agitator. Would you agree?
Well,
So I came with expertise and experience in trauma, but really wanted to understand the community. And I fully believe that you can only address trauma if you have an understanding and you have an investment. And the relationship part of the previous presentation was so incredibly accurate. Because, you know, we talk a lot about ACEs, and the study he mentioned, and I'm the science nerd of the bunch, so I apologize in advance. That data was collected in the 90s, and it looked at a retrospective, so they interviewed people and then they followed them, but a lot of the data is old. And so when we look at what the ACEs study measured, you look at things like divorce. Okay, that may or may not be traumatic for a child. We assume that it is. What it doesn't look at, and what we neglect to address when we talk about trauma, is the trauma of today. My children, I have 4 boys, and they are ages 9 through 17. And if they took the ACEs screener, they should score a 0, unless they're mad at me, which is possible because, you know, I have a 17-year-old. But all of my children have lived through a process trauma of the COVID-19 pandemic. So even though they would score a 0, I have a son who has struggled with his health and had a really hard time because he was isolated from his peers at a very important time in his development. I would score lower on the ACEs screener, but there's nothing harder in my life than having a child who is a 2-time cancer survivor. So the trauma that we deal with on a regular basis isn't necessarily captured in the data that we're collecting or we're reviewing now in 2023. When schools closed and children lost their peer support, when children were in homes that were unsafe and had no other adults like these fantastic people here who were able to intervene, they suffered more significant trauma than what we can measure with the tools that we currently have. The bomb threat happened very recently, just last week. My school wasn't closed, but 5 children managed, I live in a suburb of Indianapolis, and 5 children that did not attend my son's high school managed to get in and were undetected for over an hour. And the kids were terrified. That's something in this environment that causes trauma. I put up a map of, those are suicide rates. And if you look at where you are, you have some of the highest suicide rates in the state of Indiana. And if you look at the other slide, in Indiana, we have a significantly higher rate of suicide than the US average. So we're already high as a state overall, and you're higher than the state average. What does that indicates that we have a lot of opportunity. We don't look at this, I don't look at this data, and I love data, sorry. I don't look at this and say, look how broken things are. I look at this and say, look how much opportunity we have to intervene in the lives of students at an early age, young kids and families. Because adults, if we're gonna break the cycle of trauma, we need to start with the kids, but we have to address the family structure and we have to address the community to be resilient.
One of the things that we faced is, if you all watch the news, is Richmond just had a large industrial fire last week and lots of toxins in the air, 14-acre site. So my son goes to school, and Josh and Steph are his principals at Richmond High. So the school was closed for a week, which wasn't necessarily a traumatic event, but as a community, that was something that was really difficult to kind of deal with, and the smoke and the concerns. And rewind to January, there was a water main break at the school, and our students were learned virtually for close to a month, 3 weeks. And then in the fall, Richmond Police Officer Burton was killed in the line of duty. So as a community, the school closed for that event as well. So as we talk about trauma and impact and just being prepared to respond to kids and their needs, it's been a really difficult 6 months, 9 months for our community. And we believe that some of the things that we've put in place have really helped kind of prepare for that and speak to the need to do it and to continue to do it.
So what do we do about it? That's the question that we have to answer and be able to provide direction for folks in your seats, in our seats, in his seat, and in her seat. So we created an idea of having 4 pillars, and hopefully everybody in your community can fit into one of these pillars. The first one, feeling social, emotional support and hope. So just as Holly and Corey just spoke, we can't look at data and say, man, this really sucks and our world is terrible. Or we can't say as educators, man, kids have changed in the last 20 years. They're just more difficult to teach. All right, we have to take these students where they are, teach them Shakespeare and get them a diploma and keep them out of trouble the best we can. Those are opportunities that we have. So we have to show that and be that social and emotional support and hope. If they hear us talking about the negatives and using trauma as an excuse for poor behavior or an excuse for failure or an excuse for anything negative that you can think of, then we are doing them a huge disservice. So the people that are in front of children, first responders that are in front of children, have to spread that hope and that social and emotional well-being. They have to be that positive frontline person. We have to be that positive entity. Our jobs, naturally, we deal with kids that get in trouble. As assistant principals, that's our main job. But we don't see them as troubled kids. We see them as opportunities to help grow in a positive way. So instead of kids coming into our office with a discipline referral, oh my gosh, Johnny, not again. What the heck did you do this time? All right, we come in and say, Johnny, it's great to see you. How's it going, dude? All right, just that flip of that script can change the face of that child, can change that future for that child. So, Johnny, you messed up. You're gonna have consequences, but we're gonna work through those together. We're gonna get your parents on board. We're gonna get you a counselor if you need a counselor. If I don't have the answers to those questions, I'm not a mental health professional. I know where my strengths and my weaknesses are, but I know people because we work together. And thankfully, with the support of these folks, we have been able to provide some supports in way different ways than we're used to. 2 or more people who help you. Our keynote speaker talked about this. Show up for kids. Be that person. Be helpful. Show up. Do those positive things with them. One of the things that we work with Dr. Minji Parker, who is a professor at IU East, but he's a former gang specialist in North Carolina. And he has really helped with our youth violence situation that we've had going on for the last couple of years in Richmond. One of the things that he has really pushed us in is those positive pro-social events. We have to not just take away those negative things, we have to put positive things in their place. All right? That generational poverty, that generational violence is something that we see. And if we just blame that, oh, they're part of that family, they're going to be violent. And if we just leave that alone and don't do anything about it, or we say, hey, don't act like that, but we don't give them anything to replace it with, they're going to act like that. All right, so we have to be those 1 or 2 people who help. The community reciprocity. I was really worried I was going to mispronounce that word. I'm very proud of myself for doing well. And watching out for children, intervening when they're in trouble, doing favors for one another. This is what we talk about community. So I want you to think about your neighborhoods. Do you know your neighbors? My dad and my parents talk all the time about the impact that their neighbors have on them. I can remember growing up and I would spend time with my 80-year-old neighbor, Walter. As a little boy, he would feed my dog all the time, and I would go and have orange juice and snacks that I probably wasn't allowed to have at home. But those neighbors are really important, and somehow, some way, we have lost that sense of community in our own neighborhoods. All right? So open your doors to the kids in your neighborhoods. Your kids play with other kids. Bring them in. Get to know those kids. It really does take a village, and that's what this pillar is talking about, that reciprocity. The other thing that's talking about is we don't have all the answers even in education. All right? So what can they bring to the table? How can they support what we're doing in the school building to prevent them getting in trouble and breaking the law? Or, unfortunately, suffering health issues.
One of the things we talked about there too, sorry Josh, is staying in our lane and understanding our lane. So there's plenty of times where a student will be arrested at the school because that's what needs to happen. Josh and Steph's primary job, their focus of their job is to keep our school safe. And with the son in that building, I want him to be safe just like the other students. But there's times where a child has to be arrested and then they pass that child to me in the criminal justice system in our court system. So too, with that connection comes trust and understanding that each of us are going to make decisions, but as long as we keep the kid in the center and the safety of our community at the center, which just helps us better understand our whys in each of our unique roles.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because one of the things that we've noticed in our community is people not doing their lane because they don't trust the next lane. So we have teachers that tolerate behaviors that they shouldn't tolerate in the classrooms because they didn't trust the principals before us to do something about it, to help fix that behavior. Our job is not to hand out consequences. Our jobs are to change behaviors. All right, so we've gotten our staff to trust us enough to not tolerate certain behaviors, to send them to us, to trust us, to get them the help that they need to change their behaviors, not to hand out a consequence. And that's really important. That can be seen at all levels in our community. We've got police officers that don't make an arrest when they probably should make an arrest, or make a referral when they should make a referral, because they're not trusting the next lane to do something positive and change that behavior. So we've got to work together to build that trust. And that's what the social bridging is talking about. We have to reach outside of our comfort zones and ask for help from people that aren't experts in the education, but might have answers for us to help those students.
And so if you remember that pyramid, excuse me, from earlier in the slide, what we hope to do by having those 4 pillars is to essentially flip the pyramid upside down, so that early death is the small part instead of the part at the top. It's yours, so you like talking about.
Yeah, I really like this slide because it's a good visible representation for me. When we talk about our why, we are really, really tired of burying kids in our community. We have to quit burying our kids. And so the only way that we can do that is hold them up and build them up and make them stronger. So if we can flip that script and catch them before death, before disease and disability and social problems, if we can catch them before adoption of health risky behaviors, and prevent those drug and alcohol issues that we see in our communities and in our state, if we can stop them and catch them and support them before brain development, social, emotional, and cognitive impairment disabilities, we can't stop trauma from happening, but we fully believe that we can prevent trauma in the future. So generational power or generational trauma is a real thing, and kids feel that. We have to be there to support them and do those. So these are the 4 strategies that we've been able to come up with. And somebody asks us, what can I do to help? Can you be a person to help support kids? Do you know somebody in a lane that could help us support kids? Can you be that gap or that bridge in that gap? Can you be a part of a community and come together to help kids? And the answer is always yes, we can do those things. And the best part about that, it doesn't take money or a lot of it. It just takes people showing up and caring about kids.
The other thing that we found in the same superintendent who asked the very question, what if we become a trauma-informed community, said, as we were shaping this work, that don't we already do this stuff anyway? And the simple answer is yes, of course, you all do as a community. But when you give it words and you give it purpose, it starts to make sense. And I know that seems pretty silly, but through the things that we've just described, just like one loving, caring adult can make an impact on a kid. Just kind of having these foundational pieces, and we call this the AMIX pillars, really, because this is what Josh speaks so well to. But it really just gives us words to the work that many of us were doing in our individual lanes, which has kind of made it impactful.
People in education always want a program. They want a product that they can purchase to make the change. All right? It doesn't take products. It doesn't take programs. It takes people. It takes those relationships to help kids do the things that they need to do to stay out of trouble and be successful.
So as we talk now, meat and potatoes, you guys are probably thinking, what? And how did all this happen, and what are you guys really doing? Give us some programs. So these are our programs. We can talk about them as much as you all want. We do understand that, or at least I understand, your county has applied to be a JDAI site, I believe. Okay, good. So I, through my work as the chief PO, I'm on the state executive committee for JDAI, so I got a little bit of that intel that you all had applied. So that was really one of the first steps that we took in the juvenile justice system that transformed our work. We had done some departmental trauma-informed training. We redesigned environmentally, aesthetically, our space. We brought in blues and greens as our primary colors because we know those are the most therapeutic and calming colors. We still hear it, but we hear it less. We just need to punish that kid. We need to teach them a lesson. We're gonna arrest you and send you to probation. Well, yeah, my office isn't as pretty as this place, but it's pretty close. I don't have a good view. What we really wanted to do was, just like we heard, we just wanted to meet with kids to get the information that we have to get by Indiana code, but do it in a safe space. We're not going to create relationships or enhance relationships through fear or through shame or through guilt. So slowly we started breaking some of that down and understanding that we could have an impact in that lane. So through JDAI, one of the other things that we quickly realized, 40% of all of our crimes in Wayne County were occurring in a school building. So as we thought, and I'm not in law enforcement, from a crime control and crime prevention perspective, if 40% of all of the crime in Wayne County happened in my neighborhood, wouldn't I want to impact that? And so we knew through relationships and through loving, caring adults and with educators and with school resource officers, we could drive that number down. We had no clue how to do it, but through some just really some innovative practices and some approaches that JDAI helped us with, I'm happy to report we're down into like the 24% range. So again, a school administrator during some of our early meetings said, no child should ever have the memory of being arrested at school. Now, we're never going to reach that goal, but why shouldn't we try? So every speaking engagement I do, I share that because to me that was impactful. I don't want my child to ever have that experience. I probably should have been arrested as a kid.
I can remember when I first started as an administrator, our SRO was great, so nothing against him at all, but part of, like Corey was saying, arrest him, the punishment. I can remember one of the kids that we had arrested, and he was unsafe, like it was a necessary arrest, but he was paraded down the main hallway in his handcuffs out the side door. And just the shift in perspective is that we did have to make an arrest last week. We waited for passing period to be over. We went down the back stairs. We went into the SRO's office and out the side door so that nobody saw that happen.
And in real life example, the youth summit that I spoke of, we all participated in. It was back in the early fall, I believe. The student that was arrested was at that event. We had 50 local youth. I'd never met this child before, but having worked in probation for 27 years, I had worked with many of her family members, including her father and her mother, and a pretty significant history in that family of criminal justice involvement. So when I saw the name come across that she was coming in for her intake the next day, I had a connection with that child because of the event that we did, because they transferred some of that relationship to me. I walked in that room, I didn't use shame, I didn't use guilt, I didn't use fear, I just smiled at her. And I was like, I was really disappointed to see your name on there. And instantly there was a connection, which then helped my staff get that information that we needed by code for the intake. So again, we've tried to come around and get in front of some of the crimes that are occurring or could potentially be occurring. And again, through our work with JDAI, one of the questions that we ask or try to ask as we read police reports for school-based arrest is, did that crime occur before the school resource officer was called or after? And if it were after, we could do something. Again, we don't know what that something is, to try to de-escalate, try to provide some resources, try to do something to help not have that crime occur. Those were some tough conversations. There were some that still don't like me to this day for having that conversation, and it wasn't to second guess what that officer was doing. It was to try to provide more resources and strategies to keep that kid down rather than up. So happy to talk more about JDAI. I think there's some other things on the list as well. The school justice mental health partnership was just kind of a natural transition. We brought in some national leaders through JDI grant money that really looked at providing additional mental health support in the schools because of obviously many of the problems that the youth were facing. And then I mentioned that our local United Way gave $100,000. I don't know if any of you have heard about trust-based relational intervention training, but it is a wonderful, wonderful thing that at the time, Richmond Community Schools was doing some other initiatives around social emotional learning, so they did not participate, but all the county schools received training for all their staff in a trauma-informed practice. Happy to report that Richmond's going to bring on some of their schools now. Again, we use some of our JDA grant money to do that, but again, we started using common language. So as we talked about approaches and strategies, and they fit perfectly into our trauma-informed work. You guys want to talk about the task force?
Yeah, the Youth Violence Task Force was created in 2020 when we saw a rash in gang violence, youth gang violence in our city and in our county, I guess. That meeting is held in our office at the school, and it is consisted of educators at the middle and high school levels, probation officers, Richmond Police Department officers, Wayne County Sheriff's Office, and mental health professionals from time to time.
And also Dr. Parker from IU East.
Dr. Parker from IU East is our guiding light. He really helps us out. But really the idea behind that is we had a problem, and instead of just complain and moan about it and say this is terrible, we asked ourselves, what can we do about it? How can we be more proactive in preventing these things? So we made a list and we shared information, and we helped the officers get ahead of situations. If we knew something was going down in a neighborhood, kids trusted us and they would talk to us and help us figure out who was involved, how they were involved, when and where they were going to be. So if we showed up prior to those crimes being committed, then we could prevent that as much as possible. Like I said earlier, trauma is not an excuse for poor behavior, and sometimes poor behavior comes consequences, and those consequences have to come through. But as Corey mentioned, and Holly will speak more about, it can't stop at the consequence. We've got to have that accountability and then take away that negative behavior and replace it with a positive behavior with mental health services or positive and pro-social activities.
And then sort of born out of that task force was our Handle with Care. We didn't know that Holly was running kind of parallel with us. That's why she said that we reluctantly met with her. But our entire county is a Handle with Care county, where our law enforcement agencies and our first responders and mental health, we have several partners who we get notifications every morning at every school in Wayne County for kids who were involved in a potentially traumatic event. And then we pass that name only on to people who would have interaction with the kid. And it truly is just a name. We don't know anything that happened. There's lots of professional development that we do along those lines. And if you have questions about that, we can answer that later. But the interest of time.
Are you guys thinking about Handle with Care here? Or is that even?
I've heard it.
Okay.
It continues to come up because the concept continues to come up. So I think that's probably going to be a future stepping stone for the organization, but we're not a Handle with Care community. But that concept of cooperation, at least I'm going to start speaking for myself as a steering committee member, but that concept of continuous and ongoing cooperation across all groups that touch the lives of children who may experience trauma is my personal ultimate
It is
vision.
this-
We could fill our entire hour just with Handle with Care. So.
It is the easiest and most impactful program, in my opinion, that we have in our community.
So that's how our relationship started. I started a statewide initiative with Handle with Care. And the concept is, you don't know what's going on in that child's life. But if they come to you and you get a Handle with Care notice, it's not your business to know what's going on, but it is your responsibility to meet that child where they are. So in the very beginning, when they launched Handle with Care, one of the first stories I heard was a little boy in an alternative school had a Handle with Care notice, and he fell asleep during class, and they let him sleep. There was a student in the high school who had checked out a laptop too many times. And instead of saying no, just give her a laptop. Does that make a difference? I mean, hopefully we'll never know, right? Because the best intervention is one that results in no data, because that child doesn't have a disruptive behavior when normally that might be something that occurs. Within the first few months, 3 months maybe, you had over 1,000 handle with care notifications. And some of that could be a traffic stop. That would be very traumatic for my son. So it's just about meeting kids where they are and giving them grace, because their brains aren't developed.
So just so I understand what you're saying, so when you get it from the school, and you don't know what happened, right? So you don't know they may have been a witness to domestic violence, you don't know they may have been involved in a traffic stop
It's
or
just a
whatever it
table
is.
that
It's
says
just
their name and
someone
birthday.
gave you a notice that this kid may be having a hard time the next day.
And so then we send that notification out to their teachers, their counselors, their coaches, anybody that might have a direct interaction with that child for the next day and following days. And to date, we've had over 19,000 handle with care notifications. And that
Just over
gives
2 years.
just over 2 years. And that gives
How did that
educators.
how did the information get to you at the school?
It is a program that the Wayne County Sheriff's Department created, so it takes it right from that system. But we have, our partners are RPD, Richmond Police Department, Wayne County Sheriff's Office,
EMS.
probation, emergency medical services, dispatch.
Us.
We use the Zerker platform. I don't know what law enforcement uses.
So
So,
would that be-
yeah, they insert a name. There's QR codes and stuff for entities that don't have access to that system, or like, we are a handle with care partner, so sometimes we will put information in, and obviously we don't have access to that information system, so we use our QR code and fill it in there. But yeah, it just comes as a name. Every morning at 6:30, all of the principals of all of the schools in Wayne County get theirs, and then everybody gets one that's no school attached, in case a name is spelled wrong or a birthday's entered wrong, so that we can try to catch everybody.
So they have a tech genius in their dispatch that created this system to automatically notify, because across the United States, one of the biggest, West Virginia implemented this between law enforcement and schools, and after a few years it failed. And one of the primary reasons it failed is because of officers' lack of ability and or training, because you have turnover, you have new people come in, and it was only between law enforcement, and it relied on the officer taking an additional step and filling out a form or sending an email directly to the school. They may or may not know who that contact is at the school system. Like I said, officer turnover or training. So there's room for improvement.
For sure.
But what we came up with, and luckily, I mean, it was the genius at dispatch, was like, how can we automate this to take out barriers? Now, there's room for improvement. He did contract with, I think, Jay County to go and work with their dispatch to bring in the same patch or tech. I'm not a tech person, I don't know, I'm a data person. So that is an option. But I mean, would you say you get way more notifications through that automated system than you do from,
Right. Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So again, as we talk about interrupting or preventing or intervening, these are situations where the youth were not really, could have been arrested or could have been subject to arrest, but as we look about them going about their day and dealing with whatever difficult situation they had, are they more likely to escalate in behavior or manifest into some type of criminal justice involvement? As you all know, many of your calls are probably mental health related that turn into criminal justice involvement. So as we looked at what again could we do, this one is sort of a multi-pronged approach to try to intervene more meaningfully. This has been one of the single biggest, most impactful things that we've done.
After about probably 9 months into it, one of our toughest teachers said, shouldn't we just kind of always handle them with care?
All right, what else do we have on our list?
Yeah, we got about 10 minutes, so.
Go ahead.
So I transitioned to Purdue University, where I oversee all of our health equity initiatives. And if you're going to go ahead and go to the next slide, what I work on and what I specialize in are the social drivers of health. So a lot of what we think about, you know, to their point about this isn't a bad kid. So when you're looking at health behavior and when you're looking at the health of your community, so many of the things that are impacting the way that you behave and the way that you can be healthy and the way that you can interact with your environment are determined outside of your control. So clinical care, going to the doctor, only represents about 20% of your overall health. Your health behavior, what you choose to do, is about 30%, but the other 50% is where you live, where you work, where you play, where you pray. And you can't control all of those things. So when this child is coming, or when you look at your adult population, those who are struggling and unhoused, a lot of what they're dealing with are trauma that they had no control over, and then it's exacerbated by the 50% of things that they can't control. So there's not access to housing. One of the things that makes me most frustrated is when I talk to health professionals and or law enforcement or juvenile justice professionals, teachers, and they say a kid is non-compliant or an adult is non-compliant. I gave them an order, they didn't listen. So I come in and I say, okay, did you check to make sure that the order you gave was something they could do? Because I'm going to use just a health perspective. I'm giving you a prescription, take it. That's going to help your pre-diabetic condition. Can they afford it? Is there a pharmacy? Do they have transportation? Are they going to go without food? Is their child going to go without an activity because the prescription you provided costs 50% more because of their insurance? All of those things are things outside of that person's control, but what does that chart say? Non-compliant with medication. So we have to think about the same thing when we're talking about compliance with behavior. Does that child have the ability? Does that parent have the ability? And if not, what can we do to make up for the 50% that we as community members have in our power to make a difference, an impact? So again, what we tend to do, and this is again health because I'm a health professional, but healthcare is not health. 88% of what we spend is on clinical care. The same thing is true for our justice system. We spend a ton of money on detention. We spend a ton of money on facilities for detainment. We spend a lot of money and time in training our professionals to attack, this is theoretically, right? A problem behavior, and we don't spend the time or the money addressing all of the other things that make up the 80% outside of clinical care, that make up the 50% of your physical environment.
All right, so we talked a lot the last couple of slides. Something that we really try to focus on as a community are relationships. We are kind of living examples. When we first were introduced to JDAI, we thought Corey was crazy. Sometimes we still think Corey is crazy, but we trust Corey's crazy. And in the next couple of slides, you'll see that we're pretty crazy too, and that Corey trusts our crazy, and not only trusts our crazy, but he sends his kids to our crazy, and he helps fund our crazy through the JDI initiatives. So we believe super strongly that every child needs just at least one adult in their lives who's just rationally crazy about them. They just will do just about anything for the kid, including hold them accountable when they mess up. Lots of these kids have been in our offices, they have been in Corey's office, but it doesn't stop us from continuing to do things with them, forgive them, continue to love them and support them. This second to the right picture there is a picture of Corey. Obviously it's a couple years old now, but what is over the top of him is 9 square in the air. which is a game that we play outside of the cafeteria. Like I said, our building is obviously not humongous, but 1,300 is a pretty significant amount of teenagers in one space. So when we get out games like that, at first people were like, oh man, that's a little rough, but we make it work, we have fun with it. JDAI bought that for us and our kids. Every once in a while, Corey and some of his officers will come and play with the kids. The kid that Corey's standing next to, if you remember that first slide from us, the first graduation chair that was empty for our student that was murdered right before school was out, that's his younger brother in that picture. So, like I said, we've got a lot of hurting kids who just want someone to love them.
But like we said earlier, if we're going to expect them to get rid of their negative behaviors, we have to put positivity into their lives. So playing a game at lunch for half an hour is super easy, and it keeps us out of our office with discipline because they're being positive and pro-social. Some of the other pictures is we're going to take away the negativity of the adults in their lives. We're going to replace that with us because we know that we're positive influences on those kids, and we love them, and we'll do whatever it takes to get them to the next step. Sometimes our next step isn't necessarily in time for graduation. And we understand that some of the best relationships that we have are kids that didn't make the mark academically.
So this was one of those students. I feel like I had the conversation with him that I wanted him to graduate more than he did about 1,000 times in the 3.5 years he was at Richmond High School. He ended up not graduating from Richmond High School, but sent me this through Facebook. We just snipped it, so this is his exact wording with a picture of his diploma. He wanted to make sure that we knew that we impacted him, and because we impacted him, he finished. So. And then these are some of the crazy pictures that I'm going to tell you about. I mean, if you really want to understand something, you got to try to change it. So this is the crazy that we bring to the table and that Corey helps fund. We have positive referrals. The kids can nominate their teachers. We deliver treats in all fashions and forms. And this year we've started doing with kids as well.
Yes, those are roller skates
Yep.
on her feet.
My hair does flash. We roller skate through our 4-story building and deliver treats, and we do it on wheels.
So to close with connecting the dots, criminal justice and juvenile and the things that we started with. So some of the easiest decisions in my job are when you send kids to detention or to the Department of Correction. Some of the more difficult decisions are what you do with the ones that remain in your community, which are the kids that we all deal with. So what we know from our data with JDAI is it's expensive to detain kids. I don't know where you all send your youth. Ours go 40 to 90 miles away from their home when we detain them. But from 2017 to 2021, we dealt with 515 local youth, actual youth in Wayne County who were arrested. For the kids that we did not detain at the point of their arrest, 76% of them never had a criminal justice involvement again. So as we look at giving kids grace and a chance, statistically, I hope that 76% of those kids aren't coming back because they do stupid adolescent things. But also the kids that we sent to prison, from 2013 to 2021, we sent 32 kids to the Department of Corrections. 84% of them came out and committed crimes in our community as adults. So the easy answer is to warehouse them and send them because they need that and we need to protect our communities. But on the back end, we know that 84% of those kids are going to come out and commit some level of havoc in our community. So that makes all this worth it. The money that we divert from detention to spend on relationship building or making a connection with a kid is far worth it, and it is making an impact. So thank you. We'll be here, I think, through lunch if you have any questions. If you want a connection, I do know that our dispatch individual that helped with the Zerker handle of care is willing to help other counties, and I'd be happy to make that introduction.
Josh and I have met with a ton. Yeah, we have, like I said, we have hours worth of things that we presented just on Handle with Care alone. So when we talked about that, that's where you all had the most questions. So we're happy to answer anything now. Our emails are up there. I would say on average, we meet with some sort of community weekly because they're interested in finding out how we started and asking us questions. So we are happy to do that for you all as well.
We have a few seconds if anyone has any follow-up questions.
On the Handle with Care initiative, who triggers the label across the community? Who determines this is a Handle with Care case? Is it coming from the justice system, or the school, or the parents? Or
Coming from any of our partners, so first responders, educators, we all have the ability to trigger that label. It all comes to one place, so it'll take it from whatever entity put it in and send it right directly to the schools.
And then you guys, I believe, created, or Alan created a Google form, so if you don't have Zerker, which I have access to it in criminal justice, but I can't enter data, so I could make a Handle with Care report through a simple Google form.
Yeah, it's a web-based form that's super easy. All it asks for is a first and last name and a date of birth.
From the criminal justice side of things, and so you're a couple years in to your efforts, and I know we spent time talking about Handle with Care, but is there another program or another initiative or another diversion of funds or something that you've done in that time that you felt like has been, what's been the most impactful initiative that you've taken on that's actually reduced the amount of criminal activity you're seeing in kids? And maybe too early.
JDAI, Handle with Care, and TBRI. Honestly, those are our three heavy hitters. Now, I'm chief over our adult division as well in community corrections. We do some adult programming as well, but also trying to carry, they are juvenile specific initiatives, but our juveniles have parents, or our adult clients have kids that are on probation. So really it's those three that have been the most impactful. And they've given us grant funds to work differently.
And all three of those funnel back to the relationships between the entities and between the adult and the kid.
So just if you're interested in any of those initiatives, there is grant funding available, particularly right now because there's so much still COVID residual money coming out. Opioid settlement dollars are coming out. There is getting ready to be at least $150 million pumped into the public health system. People don't often think of this as public health, which is probably why when I called them as a public health professional, they were like, girl, we don't do that. But this is public health because these kids are not going to be healthy, just like we saw in the ACEs study, if they don't have the ability to be. So check out the Indiana Department of Health's website, DMHA, the Division of Mental Health and Addictions website, under FSSA, and if you need any of those links or anything, I don't work for the state anymore, but I've worked there for so long that I'm very familiar with it. I'm happy to connect you.
The Youth Justice Oversight Committee, there'll be some grant funds rolling out to communities as well in the fall through the Office of Court Services and Supreme Court.
Holly gives us a hard time about not ever wanting to meet with her initially, but how could you say no to Hollywood?
Nobody asked me to, but really, I'm kind of surprised.
yeah, we have one of those in Madison, Hollywood.
I've never met another.
She's downtown.
Thanks for all you all do too. This has been inspiring.